This kid, Yun Q, looked like a small fry in a gang, but at dinner, he reached for the food first. And get this, even the boss gave him a wide berth. You wouldn't believe it looking at him now, all cocky and confident. But before he fell in with this rough crowd, he was just a regular high school student. That is, until graduation was around the corner and he cracked the school bully over the head with a rock. Everyone was totally shocked, especially since Yun Q was known as the nicest kid in school. See, a few days earlier, his younger sister had accidentally filmed the bully stealing a girl's underwear. The bully, of course, didn't take kindly to that and started harassing her relentlessly. Yun Q, being the protective older brother, stepped in to defend his sister. Big mistake. The bully's retaliation was swift and brutal. It went on and on until Yun Q finally snapped. He grabbed a rock, marched straight up to the bully, and without a word, bam, busted his head open. In that moment, all the pent-up rage and frustration Yun Q had been holding inside finally exploded. But the relief was short-lived. The bully's parents showed up and unleashed their own fury on Yun Q, slapping him repeatedly. When his mom arrived and saw him being beaten, she wasn't angry or heartbroken. She was worried about how she was going to explain the medical bills to Yun Q's stepfather. It turns out that Yun Q's biological father abandoned them when he was a baby. His mom remarried, hoping for a better life for them both, but it turned into a nightmare. His stepfather was an alcoholic who beat Yun Q mercilessly. His body was constantly covered in bruises, and his mom, desperate to appease her new husband, turned a blind eye to the abuse, sacrificing her son's well-being for her own selfish desires, literally plugging her ears and pretending not to hear his cries. The only person who offered any solace was his stepsister. She was the one bright spot in his otherwise bleak existence. They became each other's confidants, the closest thing they had to family in that broken home. Now, with this whole rock-to-the-head incident, the bully's parents were demanding an exorbitant sum of 10 million won for medical expenses. Yun Q's mom, completely overwhelmed, just walked away, leaving him to deal with the consequences. He realized he was utterly alone, that he couldn't rely on anyone but himself. Determined to pay off the debt, Yun Q started working day and night at a shady restaurant run by a crooked owner. This guy would secretly sprinkle cigarette ashes into dishes if customers only ordered one item. Yun Q, being a good soul, would warn unsuspecting patrons to avoid that particular dish. But his kindness wasn't rewarded. One night, walking home from work, the bully and his crew jumped him. They threatened to torment him every single day until the debt was paid. But Yun Q had been working his butt off, and he barely had enough money to buy a burger, let alone pay off this massive sum. Desperate, he went to his boss and asked for an advance on his wages. The boss not only refused but also twisted the knife, mockingly suggesting Yun Q ask his stepfather for the money. Yun Q flew into a rage. He couldn't let his stepfather find out. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was overheard by Chi Jian, a notorious gangster who controlled the local underworld economy. Shockingly, that very night, Chi Jian sent his right-hand man, Young Mu, to deliver 10 million won to Yun Q, with specific instructions that it was a gift, not a loan. All he asked was that Yun Q go back to school and focus on his studies. The next day, Yun Q and his mother went to the school and paid off the bully's family. But instead of being relieved, his mom was suspicious, convinced that her son had resorted to something illegal to get the money. This stopped Yun Q dead in his tracks. But the real shock was yet to come. That night, his stepfather stormed in, brandishing a new baseball bat. Turns out, the bully had called him personally, taunting and humiliating him. The stepfather felt emasculated, his pride wounded, completely oblivious to the fact that Yun Q had fought the bully to protect his precious daughter. Yun Q knew he was in for a world of hurt. He bolted, desperately trying to escape, but his stepfather swung the bat, sending him sprawling. Yun Q's face slammed into a potted plant on the balcony. After that, he swore he'd do whatever it took to earn enough money to escape that hellhole of a home. He never imagined that the very next day, his boss would fire him because of the scar on his face, claimed it would scare away customers. Ironically, this turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Desperate for work, Yun Q went straight to Chi Jian. But strangely, after hearing Yun Q's plea for a job, Chi Jian flatly refused and told him to get lost. Yun Q, however, wasn't about to give up that easily. He pulled up a chair and sat down. That's when Chi Jian noticed the fresh scar on Yun Q's face. He recognized a kindred spirit, someone who had suffered like him. From their first encounter at the restaurant, Chi-jian had seen through Yun Q's facade and knew the hardships he was enduring. Hardships he himself had experienced. He initially rejected Yun Q because he didn't want the kid to follow in his footsteps, to get sucked into the dangerous world of organized crime. But now it seemed fate had other plans. On Yun Q's first day, Chi-jian personally cooked him a fish and warned him about the perils of gangster life. He told him that once he chose this path, he had to be tough, resilient, no matter how difficult things got. He pointed to the scar and said, "You have a scar now. Use it. Let me teach you." With Chi-jian, Yun Q felt a sense of belonging, a warmth he'd never experienced in his own family. On his second day, Sung Mu, Chi-jian's right-hand man, took Yun Q under his wing. He taught him how to hotwire a motorbike, explaining that these were the kinds of skills he needed to survive in their world. Stealing and reselling used motorcycles was their bread and butter. On his third day, Sung Mu took Yun Q on his first real assignment. Their target, the delivery van belonging to Yun Q's crooked former boss. First, they smashed the security cameras. Then Yun Q tried to hotwire the van. But it was his first time in the field, and his nerves got the better of him. He fumbled with the wires, unable to start the engine. With the risk of getting caught increasing, he resorted to pushing the van and running. Mission accomplished. Sort of. The next day, the stolen motorcycles were assessed. Those that weren't in good condition were stripped for parts. The rest were repainted and given new license plates, ready to be sold using a clever scheme. They weren't just selling the bikes outright. They offered financing with exorbitant interest rates, trapping buyers in a cycle of debt. It was a predatory system designed to maximize profits. And, as fate would have it, Yun Q's first customer was his former boss. Throughout the transaction, Yun Q's hands trembled, making the boss question his competence. But the deal went through, officially marking Yun Q's entry into the gang. Later that day, a middle-aged man arrived at their headquarters. Everyone bowed their heads in respect, even Chi-jian, who allowed the man to clap him on the shoulder familiarly. This man, Yungbium, was the true head of the organization. He had come with a request for Chi-jian to deal with someone who had crossed him. It turned out Yungbium had two adopted sons. One, Chi-jian, managed their underworld businesses. The other, a bespectacled guy, infiltrated the political system. He was currently running for the National Assembly. If he won, it would elevate their gang's status significantly. But a formidable opponent had emerged in the race. Yungbium ordered them to eliminate him by any means necessary. As they brainstormed, Yun Q suggested a less violent approach, compromising photos to force the opponent to withdraw. No bloodshed, no direct confrontation. They recruited Wangu, a man deeply in debt to them, offering to lower his interest payments if he'd pose as a taxi driver and pick up the rival candidate, who never took the bus. To ensure everything went smoothly, they stuffed Yun Q in the trunk. Unexpectedly, Wangu had a change of heart. He confessed to the candidate about the gang's pressure, about his son being hospitalized after a beating by their thugs, and finally, about their plan to sabotage him that day. Hidden in the trunk, Yun Q heard every word. Sympathizing with Wangu's plight, he quietly disabled the recording device they'd planted. When Wangu stopped to let the candidate out, Yun Q sprang from the trunk, grabbed a vial of chloroform, overpowered the candidate, and forced the drug down his throat. Worried that Wangu would be exposed, he told him to compose himself, wipe his tears, and tell Chi-jian that the candidate had figured out their plan, forcing Yun Q to improvise. They successfully staged compromising photos, guaranteeing the rival's withdrawal from the election. True to his word, Chi-jian reduced Wangu's interest rate and even gave him extra cash. But as Wangu left, Sung Mu intercepted him, demanding the regular monthly payment. Business is business, after all. A single coin can confound a hero, and gangsters, they do what they want. Wangu, utterly defeated, ripped up the money in despair. Chi-jian, enraged, smashed a glass, putting an end to the scene. Yun Q, watching from the sidelines, was conflicted. He realized he wasn't cut out for this life. The next morning, Yun Q approached Chi-jian. "You did good work yesterday, kid. You've got potential." To Yun Q's surprise, Chi-jian handed him a wad of cash as a reward for a job well done. Yun Q stared at the money, dumbfounded. Chi-jian, thinking it wasn't enough, pulled another 500 won from his wallet. Yun Q stammered, "What work were you talking about just now?" "Nothing, sir." "Thank you. Money talks, especially for someone desperate to escape his current reality." After this incident, Chijian fully embraced Yun Q. He not only sought out and retaliated against the school bully, but also entrusted Yun Q with delivering the compromising photos to Young Biam, a clear sign of his growing favor. Young Biam was pleased with the outcome and impressed with Yun Q. Everything seemed to be going well until Yun Q spotted Wangu's motorcycle among their inventory. Soon after, Wangu confronted Chijian, accusing him of driving him to ruin, even banging his head on the table in desperation, begging Chijian to just kill him. For someone like Chijian, who had seen it all, this was just a minor drama. But Yun Q, witnessing Wangu's despair, felt a pang of sympathy. When Wangu lost control and attempted to jump out the window, it was Yun Q who pulled him back, holding him tight. At that moment, Yun Q made a silent decision. That night, he snuck into the warehouse and returned Wangu's motorcycle. He thought he'd done it discreetly, but the next day, Chijian showed up at his doorstep. Yun Q's actions were a serious violation of the gang's code. As the leader, Chijian had to teach him a lesson. He sat down, took Yun Q's hand, and pulled out a pair of pliers. "I'm sorry, kid, but I have to do this." Yun Q's face contorted in pain, tears streaming down his face. But Chijian couldn't bring himself to do it. If Yun Q had made a mistake, it was his fault, the leader's, for not teaching him well enough. He needed Yun Q to understand that survival in their world demanded ruthless pragmatism, not misplaced compassion. So he took the pliers and, wincing in agony, ripped out his own fingernail. He told Yun Q there would be no second chances. Next time, it would be a hand. He gave Yun Q a choice: leave the gang and return to his abusive home life, or stay and fight for something better. The choice was his. Chijian's brutal lesson resonated deeply. Yun Q understood. To survive, he had to shed his compassion and embrace ruthlessness. The next day, he confronted Wangu, reclaiming the motorcycle. When his crooked former boss refused to pay up, Yun Q lunged at him, threatening to break his fingers. The speed and intensity of Yun Q's transformation shocked his former boss. He was sinking deeper into this cold-blooded world. At a dinner with Young Biam and Chijian, he was the first to reach for the food, a bold move that even the other gangsters found audacious. The boss hasn't even touched his food yet. Who do you think you are? Little did they know, this act of defiance impressed Young Biam. A few days later, the bespectacled politician, buckling under pressure, withdrew from the election. Young Biam was furious. He ordered Chijian to eliminate him and retrieve the campaign funds, specifically assigning the task to Yun Q. He clearly saw potential in Yun Q's burgeoning ruthlessness. Yun Q found the politician. Without a word, he lunged with a knife, but killing wasn't as easy as it seemed. He was clumsy, inexperienced. After a brief struggle, Yun Q found his rhythm. He raised the knife and plunged it down, ending the politician's life. He retrieved the money and headed back, but disaster struck. His motorcycle lost control, sending him tumbling down a cliff. The money was scattered and partially swept away by the river. Even worse, the motorcycle appeared to have been tampered with. Had Chijian set him up? The thought chilled Yun Q to the bone. Either scenario, a botched assassination or betrayal, was a death sentence. Meanwhile, Young Biam, assuming Yun Q had run off with the money, gave Chijian an ultimatum: bring him Yun Q's hand within 24 hours. Chijian pleaded for Yun Q, but Young Biam was unwavering. At the same time, Yun Q, battered and bruised, snuck home to steal his mother's savings. Suddenly, the door opened, revealing one of Chijian's men. He grabbed Yun Q, intending to take him to Chijian. Panicked, Yun Q knocked him unconscious with a nearby object and escaped through the window. Desperate, he went to the restaurant where his mother worked, hoping for help. Just then, his phone rang. It was Chijian. "Why did you mess with my bike?" Yun Q demanded, his voice shaking with rage. "Why did you try to kill me?" Chijian was taken aback. His mind raced, quickly piecing together the situation. He called for Sung Mu, who had always resented Yun Q. "Why did you touch Yun Q? Who gave you the right?" "It wasn't me," Sung Mu insisted. Chijian, giving him a chilling look, grabbed a nail and hammered it into Sung Mu's face. Despite Sung Mu's protests, Chijian was convinced he was the culprit. He was wrong. The real saboteur was Wangu, who harbored a deep-seated resentment towards Yun Q after the motorcycle incident. Meanwhile, Yun Q was desperately trying to raise the money, but the debt was a gaping chasm, impossible to fill. He spiraled out of control until a glimpse of his reflection snapped him back to reality. He realized his predicament was the direct result of his fateful decision to join the gang. He went to Chi-Jian and, in a gesture of atonement, started to rip out his own fingernail with the pliers, intending to repay Chi-Jian's kindness, even offering his entire hand if one nail wasn't enough. Chi-Jian stopped him, horrified by his desperate act. Unbeknownst to Yun-Q, Chi-Jian had just liquidated all his assets to cover the debt and had explained everything to Yong-Biam. But Yun-Q, consumed by guilt and disillusionment, was beyond reason. He refused to listen to Chi-Jian's explanations, determined to sever all ties with the gang. He shoved Chi-Jian to the ground, shattering glass around them. The fight erupted. Seeing Yun-Q's frenzy, Chi-Jian fought back, tackling him and pinning him down. As Yun-Q reached for his knife, Chi-Jian hesitated, his compassion surfacing again. That's when Yun-Q grabbed a steel rod and, with all his might, stabbed at Chi-Jian repeatedly. Chi-Jian's mercy was met with savage fury. Yun-Q was like a wild animal, lost to rage. As the rod came dangerously close to Chi-Jian's throat, a single drop of blood landed on his face, jolting Yun-Q back to his senses. But as he withdrew the rod, Chi-Jian grabbed his hand and guided it towards his own neck, pressing the steel deeper. He was weary of the bleak, heartless world of the gangs. He welcomed the release, even if it came at Yun-Q's hand. Chi-Jian's selfless act stemmed from seeing his younger self in Yun-Q. He, too, had an abusive, alcoholic father. When he was 7, his father, craving a drinking snack, threw him into a lake to catch fish. He nearly drowned, saved only by a fisherman who hooked him with a fishing line and pulled him to shore. That fisherman was Yong-Biam. Now, to repay that debt, Chi-Jian lived as Yong-Biam's pawn, a hollow shell of a man, never truly living for himself. He saw in Yun-Q the courage and desire for freedom he had lost. He was willing to sacrifice himself to give Yun-Q a chance the 7-year-old him never had. After all, that boy had drowned in the lake. He was already dead. The movie ends here. What do you think of the ending? Let us know in the comments below.